So let's get into more of the code and like what it actually looks like. If I can get my code open. So our model, let's just look at my user model. Okay. It's got basically the three. Let me pull open my SQL. So if I open up my home insurance and oops. Okay. Hopefully it loads. Loading. Okay. So if I open up my user table, inside of my database, I have username, user password, and user role. My model replicates that with username, password, and role. They're all strings in both sections. Okay, I have multiple different kinds of constructors. Now all of these have different uses, and that gets into what different kinds of constructors are used for. But essentially, if you need to create an object with inputs like this, then you make a constructor for it. Or you can make a basic constructor default and just use your getters and setters. How we did it in class is use the getters and setters method approach. We use the getters and setters approach. And I need to relabel that. Okay, so you're going to have a model for every one of your tables. 1, 2, 3, 4 in my case. And each one of your models will have every single one of these column names as attributes. Alright, then we'll get into the database access object. And this is where the fun happens. Alright, now we have all these different methods, and essentially they're all the same. Alright, let's get into just this first basic one, get all users. Alright, I'm gonna kind of blow through this top part here fairly quickly, as most of this is black magic to me. I know what it's doing, and so long as you know what's happening here, not necessarily how it's doing it, that's the important part. So these first 3 lines, okay? Essentially the connection starts the connection. Okay, take a step back here. Let's look at the top thing. Public list user get all users. This list user is using the model I just created. It's not using any, so far we haven't even touched the database. It's just saying I'm expecting a list of users. And the user is what we created just a second ago in the models. And I went through that really quickly because that's just a class. Everyone, hopefully at this point in time, understands what a class is. Okay? We're calling it get all users. And this gives you an idea of what our SQL statement's going to be. It's throwing 2 exceptions, an IO exception, and an SQL exception. Basically, SQL issues being constraints, not finding the table, IO exceptions, not being able to find files. Okay? Our connection con equals null. Not real sure why we set it equal to null at the beginning, but Charlie did it, so I copied it. But I do know that the connection basically states how to find the database and gives login info. The statement uses connection to run the query and return results. Now, our result set, if we actually have a set as a result, sometimes we're just going to get the number of rows or something. We're not going to actually get a result set. So if your result is a set, use result set to retrieve, or so we're going to use the result set to store the results if you have a set of data. The set of data basically meaning we actually have a set of data. Sometimes we'll get like a number and that's the rows returned, or we'll get a number and that's the ID that's been auto-generated. I'll show you a couple examples of those in a second. The result set is basically a set of data that we've got from the database. It can be one or more actual records. So if your result is a set of records, remember that's one or more. All right. We're using user as a temporary storage. We're creating a new list called all user, and this is where we're gonna, and this list is what we are gonna return. It's unpopulated. Matter of fact, it's null right now, so there's really nothing for it. We don't even have an address for it right now. So we're going to return it. It's empty, which is why we say null. There's nothing there. All right. So getting into the actual code here and like the fun parts, we have a try statement or a try block. What is a try block? Well, a try and catch block. Well, we have a try and catch block. What is a try and catch block? What is it actually doing? Well, a try and catch block, we have a bunch of stuff we want our try to do, and if at any point in time we have an exception, we want to catch that exception and handle it somehow. In our case, we are handling the exception by printing an error, then the stack trace. And if I remember properly, I talked about what a stack trace does in a different video. So inside of this try block, we have some very important things. We initialize the connection. So we create a connection class, tell the connection object to connect with our connection. Sounds a little redundant there, but basically what this has done, basically what this connection is doing is it's doing some file property stuff. I believe I went over in a different video. or so we are using the database.properties to configure connection info. The connection.getConnection. So our connection, get connection, we use our Oracle SQL connection to configure our connection info. We then return that connection info into con, our SQL connection class. It's a little bit weird, but just be aware that Oracle SQL connection class is something we made so we don't have to put a giant block of code configuring what the connection should be every single time. We're putting that somewhere else. Sets the configured URL is what it is to be the link to the database. All right, that's a little bit weird, but Oracle SQL connection is configuring all the URL and username info stuff. This con equals connection. That's setting the configured URL to be the link to the database. And then here we are setting the statement to use that link. Is essentially what we're doing. It's a lot of setting things to do stuff. All right. And then this string QString is the SQL command you would type into SQL Developer or any other SQL IDEs. I think they're called IDEs, whatever. Now be aware, we could make it a prepared statement, and we'll get into prepared statements maybe at the end of this video or at the beginning of the next video, possibly. Depends on how I cut it. This rs.statement execute query, we are executing the written query and storing result in result set. Once again, think of this as filed reader, buffered reader. We're letting our result set have all of the data so that we can read through it line by line. So we're letting our result set have the data so we can read through it line by line. All right. We are then initializing the list so we can add items to it. We have while rs.next. While rs.next, if I look at the definition here, it says returns true if the new current row is valid, false if there are no more rows. This false is basically the important part. if there's nothing else inside of my result set, stop. So if we have more results, continue is essentially what we're doing here. We create a new temporary storage value, or object, not value. We then set each of the temp values, or temp objects values, to be data from result set. All right, so it's important to note that we're creating a temporary object. We're setting that temporary object's values to be what we get from the database. Now, you might see something like a 1 here for the first column, and that is technically a correct way of doing it, but it's not quite as easy to read as having username. And if you ever go in your database and reconfigure, say that's supposed to be my first column or my last column or whatever, doing this 1, 2, 3 thing will basically mean you've just changed what data is being returned. If we label it, to be username, it'll always look for the username column. Now, if you don't have the username column, you're going to have an exception, but, you know, catch-22 there. I choose for readability. I'm probably not going to be changing my column names once I have my database already set up. We then put the user into the list to be returned. All right. And then we're going to do that for as many times as we have results. At the very end, we're going to close connection for security and memory management. Now, if you'll notice, we have this finally. What does finally do? Anybody? Think about it. Take a second. Okay. So finally will run no matter if you have an error or not. It'll always run. So it's important that we have this closing statement for each thing, for memory management as well as safety and security. We never want to leave the connection open in case someone's being nefarious and digging through our runtime using the developer tools when the application's out there. So we close all of our connections, and we close anything that has to do with the database to keep it safe and secure, as well as make sure we're not taking up any extraneous memory. At the very end, we return the list of users. Okay. So we close anything that could touch the DB for security and the memory management. Okay. Now, I'm not really going to get into the debug statements and like seeing how this works. I did that last time. I'll leave that up for everyone to go ahead and do. I will talk about a few things, and I'm going to draw some pictures to show how this works. But let's talk about the few things first. Okay, sorry, I'm back. I got new things. Oh no, I got new things. There's some things we want to talk about. First thing is, we have this prepared statement. It's got two uses. The first thing is when you're passing in data and you want it to prepare and preload in those values. So I'm inserting into my user table username and password. I can set those specific values. But another very important thing, and I'll have to go to an entirely new DAO to show this, but if I go to the case, the SBA DAO, they have this string attending ID, and what that's for is for auto incrementing values. So I don't have an auto incremented ID. I'm using my username as my primary key in this case. So if I was to have a primary key that's auto incremented, we need to prepare that auto incremented ID. So we would pass that into the prepared statement. I'm sure that's not coming across, so let me just clarify a little bit. Using attending DAO. If you had noticed while doing the SBA, every time you added into the attending DAO, it got a new ID because it's a primary key that's auto incrementing. Prepared statement can do two very big things. It can replace these question marks inside of a string with values we set outside of the string. And another very big thing is if you have an auto incrementing value, we can go in and auto increment that value so long as we tell it what the column name is. And that's what they're doing here. Now, if you don't have an auto incrementing value like me, but you still want to use the replacement of the question marks, you can do that. Matter of fact, I did that here, and my thing runs just fine. You would then use a execute update instead of an execute query. The execute update returns either the ID or the number of rows that have been changed. So if you see here, we set the ID equal to -1. And in my case, this is basically just saying the -1 is the default value in case insert fails. I will return an ID. I will return an integer of -1 if my insert fails. If my insert succeeds, I'll get an entirely new value for it. If it's auto incremented, I'll use this line. I will say I will get generated keys. And this is how they do it here. I just want to know the number of I bet. So in mine, all I cared about was making sure that my command ran. And I can do that by just checking if -1 is gone or not. So just be aware, if you have an auto-incremented key, you're going to have to do something similar to what they did in the attending DAO for registering. All right. And that's pretty much it for the different commands and stuff. If you need to return a user, depending on what you're doing, you do, instead of a list, just a user. So let me just draw a picture. I'm showing you kind of what's happening here. And hopefully it'll help. File, new. Don't save. So what's happening is we have a database. And then we have our code, right? The connection that I'm going to do the connection in dark red here. That connection is that, okay? So this is connection. Okay? The statement in green does something and then returns it to the result set, that's in blue. The result set then transfers it to the model that I'm going to do in purple here. So this is all part of the DAO right here. It's all part of the DAO. DAO. Okay. It returns it to the model as a storage. Now the storage, if you want a list, then gets added to, and I'm going to do it in brown, a list, and I'm going to put a little dot here for optional. So it's either to the list, then out, or straight out, and a return statement. That's roughly what's happening. The connection connects the two. The statement uses the connection, and I think I can do it in a better way. So give me a second to delete. Okay. So the connection, the statement uses the connection So the statement uses the connection to do something in the database. It then gets the result out, and it gets then put into the result set. The result set then sends any information there to the model or list, or to the model, and that either goes to the business object itself, or a list of model objects goes to the business object. Now, if we look at the code for the business object real quick, you'll see that really the business object has nothing in it compared to what we were doing before. The business object essentially creates a database access object and returns the same, well, it basically returns the return from the method. So if I come back to the picture, the database access object then takes that value, whatever it was given, and just sends it on to the user interface. And that's all it's doing. Now, if you had calculations that need to be done, it would also do that. But for the most part, we're not having that. It's just passing information back and forth, back and forth. All right. Oh, hi. Didn't mean to do that. So that's pretty much our get down. Okay. That's pretty much our business objects, database access objects, and models, what they're used for. We will have a different model, database access object, and business object per table. Be aware of that. And they're all going to be pretty much the same thing. As a matter of fact, I basically copied and pasted. Once I had my user table one done, I copied and pasted it for every other one I had. The only thing you have to do is, if you have a bunch of properties and stuff, do them. As you can see. As a matter of fact, I need to go back in and change some stuff because I just copied and pasted it, not realizing that I was doing it slightly wrong. So this is something everyone needs to be aware of. There are slight differences depending on how you built it. In my property, I actually do have a property ID. But and I'll show you guys how I could fix that. So property location ID. I can do that. So that basically fixes it. So I have an auto incrementing ID. All right. Thanks for tuning in, I guess. If you have any comments, would like me to cover something I possibly glanced over today, just let me know, and hopefully I'll get this posted shortly so everyone has time to do it and watch it. Thank you.